Welcome back to the Algarve, where the much anticipated Honda TRANSALP XL750 has finally arrived. And in this video, I'll be giving you my first impressions. What's it like to ride? Comfort, handling, stability, power, luggage carrying ability. How does it look in the flesh? And all the other questions you've sent in. To cut to the chase, the TRANSALP is exactly as I'd hoped. The sweet spot between the petite CB500X and an Africa Twin that's too big and too expensive. The first thing I notice is just how easy it is to stand over the bike. The suspension is on the soft side, so it does squat down at the rear a fair bit once you climb on. I'm 1.87 m or just over 6'1", and as you can see, I had absolutely no problem flat-footing both feet. The tank itself is quite wide, but the front of the seat between your legs is remarkably narrow. The engine starts with an impressive bassy burble, the clutch is light and everything falls to hand naturally. It's a Honda and you feel right at home right away. What strikes me immediately is how neutral the handling is. As other journalists have said, the 21-inch front wheel feels more like a 19 on the road. I should say at this point that I didn't have the opportunity to take the bike off-road at all, but when mine arrives, hopefully in the next week or so, I'll be doing plenty of that, so stick around. Yeah, so the 21-inch wheel is absolutely not a hindrance on the road. Turn-in is clean, if not sports bike sharp, and the wide bars and upright riding position give supreme comfort, as does the seat, at least for my 1 hour long test ride. And I didn't find the rider pillion hump to be a problem, although my dealer said he found it to be too pronounced. 5 stars for comfort then. I can easily see myself riding through Spain and France on this. I rode the Hornet a few weeks ago and was impressed by the power the new 92 horsepower parallel twin delivers. The slightly heavier, taller TRANSALP doesn't feel quite as peppy, but there's ample power. Now unfortunately, when I was testing yesterday, it was about 32 degrees, and I think the camera must have overheated or something because it somehow failed to record my 10-minute stint on the German Autobahn. So you're just going to have to take my word on this. Overtaking is a breeze on the TRANSALP, and I found myself at 150 kilometers an hour, 90 miles an hour with no effort whatsoever on the German Autobahn. It hasn't quite got the beefy torque of the Africa Twin or my Triumph Speed Twin, but if anything, this almost makes it easier and more relaxing to ride, and it is certainly what I was hoping for. The TRANSALP is impressively light for a mid-size adventure bike at only 208 kilos wet, and you can certainly feel this in the bends and when you slow down. The front brake, despite only having twin pistons, is certainly up to the job, and while the rear brake is predictably average, as they often are, it's strong enough to assist in turning on roundabouts and haul you up gently at a stop sign. One final thought before I get on to your questions. The overall stability, not sure if this is down to the 21-inch front or the geometry of the bike, probably a combination of both, but at higher speeds I was struck by just how planted the bike felt. Now, this isn't normally something I worry about. My Speed Twin with its small 17-inch wheels and beefy 1200cc engine can be a lively beast, but I kind of like that on a bike, and I have to admit that the TRANSALP provides a level of serenity that I'm not really used to on any bike, and once again suits the sort of long distance riding I'll be doing on mine. Okay, so let's move on to your questions in no particular order. Thanks for sending all of these in. It's always useful to have extra input. Tyres and valves. The valves are unfortunately not the 90-degree variety, but they are quite short, and the clearance offered by the larger wheels means that inflating them shouldn't be too much of a chore. The tyres on this test bike were the excellent Metzeler Karoo Streets that coincidentally I've been running for the past year on my Honda ADV 350 and have been very impressed by. They're tubed, of course, on the TRANSALP, which puts quite a few people off. I must confess that I would have preferred tubeless, as these tend to deflate more slowly in the event of a puncture, which is obviously safer, and they're generally thought of as being easier to repair. But it wasn't a deal breaker for me. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. Next question, can you fit a disc lock under the seat? Well, as you can see, space is tight and I wasn't very optimistic, but I brought along a couple of locks to try them out. This Urban UR6 is what I would call a standard size disc lock, and I did eventually find a place to where it could be stowed, and the even larger Abbas granite sledge went in with a bit of jiggling. Off camera, because I needed both hands, I put the seat back on and it worked, so I guess that's one less thing to have rattling around inside your panniers. Talking of which, the next question you asked was, will SW Motec's popular Blaze side bags fit the TRANSALP? Well, I brought mine along, and yes is the answer. I didn't have a lot of time, but from what I could tell, it may even be possible to use them without any support brackets, which is a good thing because SW Motec have intimated to me that they will not be making the brackets for the TRANSALP, presumably in an attempt to get us to invest in their more expensive off-road type luggage. I also tried my Pro Engage tank bag, obviously without installing the tank ring, and the Pro rear bag, and both seem to fit the bike's contours nicely. I'll be doing a more in-depth review of these accessories and more once I get my bike. You're also curious about vibrations. This is something which does affect the CB500X, and it's a bit of a mixed bag here with the TRANSALP. I couldn't feel any vibration through my feet or backside, but the grips were ever so slightly buzzy. Now, I always fit grip puppies to my bikes. Obviously this demonstrator didn't have them, so perhaps that's why I noticed them, but fitting them would help. It is something that I picked up on during the test ride, so maybe something to be aware of. The screen, can it be adjusted? Nope. Even with tools, there does appear to be about 1 centimetre of play in the bolts, but this isn't going to make much of a difference, and I don't even know if it affects the height anyway. I have ordered the optional side deflector kit for my bike, and I'm glad I did really, because the screen didn't seem to offer as much protection as I was hoping for my admittedly above average height. It's not terrible, obviously a lot better than my Speed Twin, about the same as my ADV I'd say, but down on more dedicated tourers like the BMW 1250 RT or Honda's own NT1100. I'll see how I get on. There's an optional touring screen available, or I may fit a deflector like the one I have on my scooter. Next question I have, is the bike tippy? In other words, can you feel the weight up high when pushing it around in the garage, for example? In a word, no. Unlike the very top heavy Tenere, the TRANSALP carries its weight nice and low, and there's a nice chunky rear rack to grab hold of when you're manoeuvring. The only issue for shorter riders is going to be the relatively tall and wide handlebars, but this is a light, manageable bike overall. Next, is there an ambient temperature display? No, unfortunately. Honda give me one on the ADV scooter, so not sure why they've skimped on it on the TRANSALP. I've bought a cheap Chinese analog thermometer to stick on the dash opposite the 12-volt power outlet. Does the bike have cruise control? No. Should Honda have offered one? Yes, obviously, along with tubeless tyres and a bolt-on rear subframe, but what are you going to do other than go for a more expensive bike? Final question before I get on to the looks. Does it have a splash guard to protect the rear shock from the worst of the crud? Yes, I'm glad to say it does, and here it is in all its splendour. Incidentally, talking of the rear shock, I think increasing the preload a couple of clicks will be one of the first jobs I do on my bike, because it's a bit wallowy for my 90 kilos on the factory setting. Okay, so what about the way the bike looks? Another divisive topic. Well, this is subjective, but I've ordered one, so obviously I don't really mind the way it looks. In my opinion, it's better than the majority of adventure bikes, not quite up there with the Multistradas or even the Africa Twin, but it's more substantial than, say, the CB500X and more cohesive, again in my own personal opinion, than the Suzuki 800DE. Does it look better in person than in the photos? Well, no. I've never really understood what people mean by this. To me, it looks exactly like all the photos and the videos I've seen of it. That said, I have to say that this silver model I tested and the anthracite example the dealership had in their showroom did look less bland than I'd imagined. I've ordered the tricolour, the white one, and I must admit that for the last 6 months I've been wondering why anyone would want the boring silver or black. With its gold rims and additional decals, the white seemed like the obvious choice. But when I saw this silver bike in person, I have to admit, I think it also makes a good choice. I do think Honda has missed a trick though in not putting the gold rims on the black version as well. That really would have looked nice. All things considered then, I think this is a reasonably good looking adventure bike, especially from the side. I think the only problem is the headlight, which for cost cutting reasons has been lifted straight from the CB500X. No Honda. It's too small and it's too high and it just looks a bit pinched and, well, as if it's been designed for a different bike, which it was. It reminds me of the front of the Kia Sportage. Not ugly exactly, but weird. By all accounts it works well enough though as a headlight, and that's the main thing. So in conclusion, as I think you've probably gathered, I'm very pleased with my gamble. I ordered blind, putting my deposit down 6 months ago, but I banked on the fact that this was a Honda, so easy to live with, that it had 90 horsepower, so more oomph than my 2019 CB500X for the longer trips that I intend using this for. I didn't want the expense or the bulk of a full-size adventure tourer like the Africa Twin, nor did I want a more off-road focused bike like the Tenere, and at least going on first impressions, I think the TRANSALP, at least for me, hits the sweet spot. Anyway, mine should be arriving in the next week or so with a bit of luck, so if you do want to follow me on my adventures or see the modifications I intend making to the bike, then feel free to subscribe. Many thanks once again to Annelise and Duarte at Angel Pilot in Portimao for the loan of this test bike. Their contact details are in the description in case you're in the area, and as always, thanks for watching.